Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Monday morning coffee morning with Jay, Piotr, and today Ranjan Bhattacharya.
Hi there, guys.
Morning, everybody.
Today we thought we're going to bring a special guest because there were quite a few questions about commercial property. And since there's only one king of commercial property, we thought we'll invite him in for this morning chat. So welcome, Ranjan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Which island are you on today?
Oh, the island of the island of Rickmansworth, Hertfordshire. The wonders of green screen.
Amazing. Yes, so we had obviously we ran this format, just people can ask questions and we just answer them, and we just have a bit of a chat about everything on this this chat. But quite a few people ask us about commercial property. When is a good time to buy this? What's happening in the market right now with commercial property? Obviously, you do a lot. You're very active, and plus you also have a portfolio of commercial property. So tell us your first-hand experience of what's happening in the market now.
Well, of course, one of the benefits of commercial property, if I can start with that, has always been that typically a lot of the landlords that own commercial property are small players like me. I mean, I'm very, very small in comparison to large PLCs like Greggs and Costa and Coral and all these big names, Starbucks and McDonald's. These people are massive companies. And the great thing about commercial property, the law, doesn't matter if it's a David and Goliath type of situation, the law has been very, very good to ensure that big companies cannot mess small landlords around with rent payment. And that's made it a very attractive asset class. What the government has done, of course, is given all commercial tenants a 3-month moratorium from having forfeiture of the lease, which has meant the big guys in particular have decided that they don't want to pay. Now, there have been some statistics about this. I mean, commercial rents are paid quarterly, and the last quarter payment date was the 25th of March. And Knight Frank did a national survey, and they found that 29% of all commercial rents were actually paid. But if you actually drill down into the detail, and I spoke to one guy who collected 18% of his rent roll in commercial rents. But when you drill down into the detail, it all depends on who your tenants are. We actually collected 67% of our commercial rent roll, and it was the large players that didn't pay up. Now, this has always gone against, I've always kind of gone against conventional wisdom when banks and people talk about covenants. They all get very excited by having Starbucks and all these big names in your properties. I tend to favor the small guy. I want the independence because the mom and pops or the small chains, and I rent directly to the proprietor, where the proprietor is a UK homeowner. And that makes it very difficult for them to walk away from. They know that they can't, and they've got more on the hook. There's more on the line with them than I have with my residential tenants who aren't UK homeowners, who don't have that asset base to back their tenancy. So what I've found is that because I've gone for a lot of smaller tenants who banks often consider as lesser covenants, they have actually paid up. And it is the big guys who are benefiting hugely from the government schemes, because the government have directed all the help at the tenant to help them meet their fixed costs. And what the big companies have done is they've just kept that money in the bank, and they're not passing it on to their landlords. And this is a real problem for many landlords. But the key to getting your commercial rents paid is going to be your plan, and Jay talks about this a lot, multiple exit routes, because I only buy properties with multiple exit routes. So if I've got a commercial property, I know if that tenant moves out, I can do this with it or that with it or the other with it. And often those plan B, C, and Ds, it actually puts me in a better position than them being in the property. Yeah. So if I've got a premises where there's no alternative use, then the tenant has the upper hand in any negotiation. And if they want I've had letters from people, standard letters from big companies, and they're asking for rent-free period of 6 months or more. Now they're sending those standard letters out to all their landlords, but the ones with sites, the landlords who have sites with alternative uses will push back and say no. So this is going to be a real situation where the people with quality commercial assets will survive, and the people with no alternative uses and or not very good sites in terms of local footfall and the like, and affluence, local area affluence, will suffer, and that's what I see going forward.
Yeah, I really like also like the way you look at purchasing your like new acquisitions. I remember when you were in the also commercial auction where you just like casually walked in, not knowing which lot was it, and then you just like raised your hand a couple of times and you picked up this tire and exhaust center in where was it? In
Hawley, yes,
Hawley.
yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, Jay and I discussed a site in the last Allsops. It was this coral site. I don't know if you remember chatting about it.
Yeah.
Now, you know, on paper, it was a textbook site because it's A2 usage class. You can convert to residential partially or fully, in fact, because it's in a really, not a secondary parade, but a third tier parade. But when you actually go to see that site, you can see physically it's impossible to convert into residential. So it doesn't have an alternative use. It doesn't have it because there's just no access at the back. There's no way of getting light in. It's a long story, but there's no alternative use for it. And those sort of sites will go unloved. And I'm not recommending buy those sites. I mean, I think there are two buzzwords now that you hear business people talk about. People use the word unprecedented and they use the word pivot because you've got to pivot your strategy. So prior to this crisis, I was looking at commercial property as commercial buy-to-let. Now that strategy is completely pivoted because commercial property as a buy-to-let asset class will take a long time to recover and longer to recover than residential property. It always has done in recessions. The deeper the recession, the more commercial property tends to lag behind residential property. So what's the point in looking at sites on the basis of commercial buy-to-let? You've got to look at, there's going to be a whole host of commercial properties come up over the next few months. As soon as we get out of lockdown, loads of businesses are going to go to the wall. Loads of landlords will be teetering on cash flow. There'll be a lot of pent-up supply that will suddenly start to come up on the market. So I think we may see 2 or 3 times the amount of commercial assets on the market in a few months' time as we have done if you compare the same period last year. But that doesn't mean all those sites are worth buying. Many of them will have no alternative uses, and those values will be severely depressed. What I'm saying is permitted development is only getting better. Yep. They only seem to be adding more and more PD rights to deal with this massive oversupply of commercial stock. So it's worth educating yourself about those PD rights and picking off the sites which are distressed, which have PD conversion rights, and then moving them from an asset class which is commercial, which is slow to recover, and changing them to an asset class which is residential, which will be faster to recover. And surely that has to make sense to add value in what will be a challenging market, but full of opportunities over the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were, and it's always a pleasure hearing you talk about your mindset when it comes to property and what you're looking at and how you perceive things, because it really is, it's an interesting element, because a lot of people tend to just have a very fixed approach of how they look at their investment model, and you're always looking at how you multiply it and how you can look at it in different ways, which is always a pleasure to hear. But so let me we were talking about this yesterday in terms of volatility on commercial versus residential. And myself and Piotr had differing views. I said you're probably going to get more volatility over a 10-year period on residential than you would over commercial. Piotr was the other way and had a really good case study to back that up. But my question for you, Ranjan, is, let's say you're looking at the Allsops commercial May auction, and there is something in there which is an absolute stonker. Right? It just on the sheer metrics of it, it's the best thing you've ever seen. All the fundamentals, the core principles of what you're looking at, is all singing, all dancing, but you know that there's a reduced market looking at these auctions because some people don't understand the online bidding, some people are just not taking steps forward. What do you do?
I actually think it's too soon. I think what I'm doing in terms of preparing the opportunity is working with people, private investors. I mean, for several years, I haven't really worked with too many private investors. I'm kind of gearing up now to work much more with private investors and building those relationships and talking to them about the plans that we have. Because this is a bit of a falling knife syndrome. You know, you got to wait until the knife hits the ground rather than try to catch it in midair. And this is what I think is different about previous recessions. In 2008, 2009, the Lehman's crash happened, and we were reacting to events when the events were in the rear view mirror. In the early 1990s, interest rates shot up to 15%, and we were reacting to events in the rear view mirror. The event is not in the rear view mirror yet. Until we come out of lockdown and we just see the extent of business failures and how slow, because I don't think businesses as a whole are going to just pop back and it's going to snap back into place overnight. Until we see the extent of that, until the event itself is in the rear view mirror, it's very difficult to plan to exploit the opportunity. So what I'm saying is, even in the May auction, yes, watch with interest. There may be something, but you can be in a situation where, because I think this is going to be quite a different recession, because I think that because we have stopped in a massive hurry, it will be a sort of not a long, slow recovery as previous recessions, but a little bit faster. But what we've got to do is get to the end of this event, and this event is not over until we see, the health issues, the peaking of the deaths, the easing of the lockdown, and the aftermath. You know, when I watch Sky News and all of that, and you see some reporter in a cyclone, when they're holding their raincoat and they're swaying around in the wind, and it never looks that bad. But when they go back and report on it a day later, and you see the devastation all around the place, it looks a lot worse. So I just want to see that first, if that makes sense. I think we're in the middle of the event. I've done exceptionally well in recessions, and I didn't wish this event on anyone. It's here, it's on all of us. We can either sit back and moan about it, or you can say, look, it's here. You've got to seize these opportunities, because you don't get these opportunities many times in your lifetime. But I'm not sure it's prudent to do so unless the event is in the rear view mirror, if that makes sense.
So here's the interesting things that I found from what you've just said there is, I absolutely agree that the 2008 crash and the late 1990s crash, those were all financial recessions based on our economy. Those were economic financial distresses that caused recession, obviously impacted on property. What we're looking at here is we're looking at a pandemic based forced recession, which you probably haven't seen since the bubonic plague, right? I mean, how often did this happen? We haven't been in this kind of situation for a good 1,000 years, Do
you know, sorry to interrupt, but there was something called Hong Kong flu in July 1968, which killed 50,000 people in the UK. But the Beatles carried on doing concerts and everything was open.
Yeah, so
they handled it in a slightly different way.
It's coming down to this how we're kind of in this forced reduction of momentum and productivity in business and all these other things. The interesting thing for me in this market is that I think people have acted far more responsibly. Not just in every respect. You look at the 2008 crash, they were still releasing mortgages over 80% loan to value 6 to 9 months after the Q2 drop, right? So that you look in hindsight, that is not the most responsible thing to do. You look at this marketplace, week 2, the largest bridging finance company in the country said, you know what, we'll handle existing cases, but we're drawing from the market, we're products off the shelf. You can say the same thing about Barclays, but it doesn't really matter because they're not really a buy-to-let specialist. They have a couple of products, but it's not their for. But you are seeing a reduction, and even the government incentives that they're encouraging banks to lend and do all these different things. I've been speaking to a couple of brokers, but apparently the hoops that these businesses and these people have to jump through to get the lending through or get anything through or done is astronomical. And the one chap I was speaking to, Sam Norris, was saying he thinks it may be done on a quota basis. So of the 100 cases they're sent, that specific bank on that type of funding instrument would just say, okay, of the 100 you can only approve 10. So whether you do 1 in every 5 or the first 10 that come in the morning, that's your cap. It's just really interesting to see. And obviously you look at the auctions as well. This came out, and really before the lockdown was announced, a good chunk of the auctioneers had already said, we're gonna come up with a hybrid approach. We're gonna problem solve this. We're gonna. There was a lot of really positive actions that were being taken in a very responsible way, and obviously it's not the same for everybody. But I remember the 2008 crash. I was active in property in the 2008 crash, well, not in the late 90s, but in the 2008 crash I was. The entire landscape for me has changed drastically, not just in what you can do in property these days, but also the amount of legislation that's coming in the last 5 years. I think I was reading a statistic recently. It says, X number of landlords have exited the market in the last X number of years, and you think, well, are those the landlords that were, the slum landlords or the not very good landlords, or are those just people who think, it's just too difficult to make a buy-to-let portfolio work with all this legislation? So for me, I think you're right. This once the pandemic passes, I see a lot more elasticity in the recovery than anyone would have foreseen in the 2008. So I don't think you can reference the two and have any real, link apart from the fact that there's going to be economic downturn included with this as well.
Yes, I think one of the things where you see landlords exit at recession is that because in the past, well, not in the past, all the time, I've always done a lot of work with retiring landlords and people who are older than me who are withdrawing from the market. And it's the same old, really. The property market cycle takes many, many years. And in your property investment career, you only have about 3 max, really, that you of useful energy where you're on full thrusters and all of that. And there are some people cash in their chips, and people find it difficult to cash in their chips when the market's on a high because everyone thinks it's going to go up. And then it just drops, but it's still much higher than when they got in. So at that point, if you're 65 years old or something, it just makes sense to exit.
Yeah.
So I've seen an age-dependent exit at recession, no matter what the rules are. And everyone, and I'll tell you, whether it's 2008 or the 1990s, everyone that I've bought off has said it was a lot easier when I got started.
Yeah.
They've all said that.
Yeah. The truth is, it was a lot easier when I got started as well.
and people, the people, landlords were saying that to me in 2008. But many people started in 2008, and today are saying it was a lot easier in 2008. If that makes sense, yeah. So recession obviously drives out a lot of people. Section 24 is going to add a little bit as well, and I think the difference this time round will be I mean, so much depends on how quickly the job market bounces back.
Well, there's been a lot.
Guys, because like obviously everyone is now talking about the depression or the recession caused by the virus and everything else. But obviously people have been talking about upcoming recession for years, right? And it should be around whatever 2018, 2020, 2022. So like if we have a depression now, say GDP goes down 10%, then it recovers. That would be purely due to this virus that no one ever expected. So what about the recession that everyone expected?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point.
Because now obviously the interest rates are super low, and there's so much money in the economy added by the central banks. So there is like all the levers that the governments and central banks have got, they've been used up. So
I'm worried about the what QE, what I call crack economics, and what's that going to sort of result? Because the problem is, of course, is that, I mean, this is not my opinion. This is just an economic fact. You can print more money as long as there's a corresponding growth in GDP to mop it up. If you print more money and there's a corresponding fall in GDP, real fall in GDP, then that always leads to inflation.
Yeah.
This is not my opinion here. This is just any economist would be able to verify that. So if we're going to have a fall in GDP, a real fall in GDP, then what's going to happen? The only saving grace seems to be that everyone's doing crack economics at the same time. So it's a little bit uncharted, but I'd be very worried if I had, for people with cash in the bank, the incentive to do something useful with it is very, very real. And I would also like to kind of mention a couple of things that Donald Trump has done in the States. And I'm really hoping that, because I know they look a lot at what happens across the pond in terms of their policies. Donald Trump, love him or hate him, he knows business and he understands how to get things going. He's done a couple of very interesting things. When they come out of lockdown, for commercial property, they've introduced something as part of their recovery plan where you can spend any amount of money developing or improving commercial property and write that off against your current year's tax. Now the logic of that is, whereas Britain seems to be saying, oh well, let's build some high-speed railway and let the government piss up money up the wall. They're giving the devolved power, if you like, to small businesses to invest and target the money at infrastructure development, which they know will boost construction, which boosts supply chain, which boosts jobs and gets America moving. So I'm really hoping they kind of look across the pond and cut and paste some of that. In the 2008 recession here, one thing they did is increase the stamp duty thresholds on commercial property. So many of the commercial properties I bought between 2009 and 2013, even in London, was free of any SDLT because they raised the stamp duty threshold, took a lot of properties out of SDLT for that period to allow for that recovery. So since they've done that before, I'm hoping they do that again. So I'm really hoping what we're also looking at is there's going to be another budget based on recovery once we're out of lockdown. And we need to watch that very closely to see what's in it for us. Are they going to go down the lefty kind of, oh, we need to tax the shit out of everyone, or are they actually going to give focused breaks and incentive for people to actually build and create jobs and create wealth? That's one of the wait and see aspects that we need to see how things settle.
And would you say going forward, it's going to be better to buy in auctions, or it's going to be better to approach sellers directly?
Both. I think, I mean, auctions are always fabulous because, as we all know, all three of us know, that the thing with commercial properties is it's not entirely obvious what to do with it, and two buyers may have two completely different plans for it. Whereas there's not that much new angle you can think of with a 3-bed end of terrace. It's quite different with commercial. And the points that Jay alluded to earlier with the online, now it's going online. I think that would favor people that have done it before as opposed to new people, because they will be very, very scared if they haven't actually been in the room and done it and dealt with a lot of these people beforehand. They would be suspicious. That's my feeling.
Would you buy something based on a virtual viewing?
No. It's very, very difficult because I'm looking at alternate uses, and how can I tell about those alternate uses if I haven't seen it? And sometimes there are things that they don't, well, most of the times they're things that they don't tell you in the catalogue, which make it better for alternative uses. On my YouTube channel, the shop, the flat behind the shop in Kieran Gill's deal, the auction catalogue never mentioned that there are windows to the side of that extension. It never had that floor plan. That was only seen by going there, and you could then see how suitable it was to make the flat at the back. So the people who hadn't seen that physically would not have known that. And conversely, the deal that I looked at with the coral that I was telling you about, Jay, again, by seeing it, you could see that it's not possible to do the conversion.
Yeah.
So you could argue that obviously, like with a proper virtual viewing where you have the whole tour of the property and you can see everything as if you were there, you could actually see those things, no?
Because the international community, so the Chinese and the Russians, and I guess some people in the Middle East have been buying properties in the UK virtually for quite a few years, and I think the technology's come on quite nicely.
I guess they're not buying for the same purposes that we're buying.
No, of course, but it's still
very different type of.
How have they done it? Because what I've done before several times is because often, you know, these viewings, you get these auction viewings and they're only on certain days, and there are plenty of them I just can't do because I've got an event or I've got a meeting, I've got something else going on in one of my other businesses. So often I send someone and they're on WhatsApp, and they do, I can't really do the agent or the auctioneer doing a video. What I want is someone to go there and I'm chatting with them. Oh, can you just point the camera at that bit and pan around here? Do you know what I mean? So I do that. I've done that before several times, and I've bought based on that. But that's based on someone being there and giving me a virtual tour, and then I'm asking him or her to kind of focus the camera on this or go there or have a look at this and tell me if there's a 3-phase supply instead of a 1-phase supply, for example. Shine a measurer to show me the ceiling height in the basement. All this sort of stuff you can do if you're interacting with the person over WhatsApp. I don't know, is that what you meant by virtual viewings, or interactive virtual viewing?
I think what we could create that would revolutionize auction market and auction viewings is actually viewing like that, where you actually go. It's almost using the Matterport system, but then focusing on things like electricity supply, like the gas supply, like actually giving people access to it. So they still have to click onto it if they want to, but it's available. So I think, Jade, we've got some work to do today.
Well, I've used a very, very similar service to what you described there, Ranj, and I'd sent a local agent that I knew to an auction viewing and had him do a walkthrough, telling me everything that he thought whilst he was there.
Yes.
And it worked well. It worked well for me. And Sue's just made a brilliant comment. Yeah, but the virtual tour won't show the damp or the cracks, which is why it's important for you not to just have like an automatic camera just pushing you through hallways and spinning around rooms, but having a physical human being there going, okay, I'm in this room. Yeah, it smells a little bit damp, or oh, can you see this hairline crack from this window sill down to the ground, and things like that. That is actually really valuable stuff. I think I gave him like 30 or 40 quid for it when he was on his lunch break. So it for me, it was great value. I think in that instance, I didn't go and buy it, but I knew I couldn't make the viewing and I didn't want to miss out on an opportunity. But there's a service out there at the moment called Viewber. And Viewber, depending on how much you're willing to pay, basically you're paying for someone to go to the viewing for you, take additional pictures and write a mini report of what they saw.
Do they do that?
Yeah.
You can
they do that for purchasers. I thought they just did that for landlords.
They'll do it for anyone who pays them.
It's quite cheap. It costs £30 plus VAT for half an hour viewing, basically.
And you can give them specific instructions. Like on the outset go, oh, I'm looking specifically for X, Y, and Z, or can you tell me how many people turned up, or, you know, different things like this, or can you take pictures up and down the road and the side and the back of the building, all that stuff. And like Piotr says, that's not that expensive, but they don't do it live at the moment. So if you wanted to, you may have to stipulate, oh, if you've got a smartphone, can we walk around the building together? I just physically can't do that.
Do it.
I think they can do it too, but it's all how you arrange it.
That's I set it up. I ask them sometimes to do a WhatsApp video when they're with me. So usually it's fairly simple.
I just, well, I don't know whether I mentioned this to you, but our properties are in London, but our office is in St Albans. So I looked at Viewber, but we ended up hiring, we've hired our own, we call them viewing agents. So they all live in the areas where the properties are, and we pay them per view on a gig basis. And they do all our viewings for us. And it's some of those guys I use to go out and do my viewings on properties that I'm interested in. And they also do inventories and all of that. So what we've done is set up a mini Viewber, which is dedicated to the way we use
You've got
those
that
folks.
infrastructure, then that clearly it's something that that's brilliant. I think what Sue put here, but the seller will be providing a viewing video of the auction house. When I worked at Auction House London, we had brought in a requirement that if we were able to view the property, whoever was viewing the property in the office would do a video walkthrough, and that video walkthrough would be uploaded onto the property. So I guess most people realise that auction, you very rarely get a property with a floor plan. So there's great advantages and great disadvantages there, but we knew that there were a lot of people who couldn't make the auction viewing times, because they're normally in the middle of the day, in the middle of the week. They're not the most opportune times. So by having that video walkthrough, it was an indicative situation. So it gave people an indicator of the general state and the general feel of the property. And then they could decide, oh, actually, you know what? I saw that video. Is it worth me taking that hour out of my day and going down there and viewing it in person to get additional data? Or is it actually, no, that's not at all what I'm looking for next? In this market, it's a little difficult because even if you do think, oh, you know what, actually, yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for. I need additional data. Let me turn up to the property. Oh, my God, I can't. That's the kind of situation that you're in now. And I think we've been talking about this for a couple of days. And although it's not a solution that I feel is workable long term or actually short term, but if you are looking at a property and the deal makes sense to you, these are the things I would want to see. I'd want to see a floor plan, including room measurements. I'd want to see at least 4 pictures of every single room. That's probably all 4 corners of the room. I'd want to see that.
Yes.
and I'd want to see a video walkthrough of an agent or a human being walking through, talking, okay, yeah, this is what I'm seeing here. And, and here's the beautiful thing about the auction is the more problems the property has, the more value it has to you as an investor. Because investors, when they're buying things at auction at that discount, they're looking for the problems that they can solve that will then intrinsically add value to that property. That's the whole idea of it. There are perfect properties that go to auction and there's nothing wrong with them. And those are good stoic investments. Those are what the asset managery LLP type people buy, because they just stick it in the background and it self-serves itself. Yeah, I think if you're looking at doing something, you really do need a bells and braces kind of view of the internal of that property. And as Ranjan was saying, even the internal of the property isn't good enough. That property we were looking at in Hertfordshire, that Coral betting shop with the freehold and the flats and all of that stuff, you were only going to know whether that was suitable for the commercial conversion or not if you had viewed the outside of that building. If you'd actually gone there and touched a brick or done whatever weird thing you do, and you'd seen it, right? Because actually the value of that building with a Coral isn't that much. Since they changed the regulation on betting shops, the multiplier on there is fairly poor, and I would say it's no longer a double A covenant. It's barely a B covenant for me. So it's really very important, I think, that even if you're not going inside the building, you can still do a drive-by. As long as you're not getting out the car and sneezing on people or touching people's hands or, running up to newborn babies and kissing them or whatever, you should be fine. But again, I'm a big fan in a situation like this is, stay home, stay safe, stay well. And I guess Google Maps will help you somewhat, but you're looking at a snapshot in time at whatever month or year when the last picture was taken. So a pinch of salt is required. So Bushra has said, Jay, why doesn't the vendor usually supply a floor plan at auction? Is it just the cost factor? Sometimes it's the cost factor, which I think is very lazy. Sometimes it's not in their benefit to provide a floor plan. A lot of people will conduct their valuation on the property based on, pound per square foot or yield. And if the floor plan isn't attractive, they'll think that will detract from the value of the property. But that's normally just one person looking at something in a very short view. I feel floor plans are vitally important, but I don't think you're going to change the industry on that point, I'm afraid.
If I may just interject and suggest something, you can always, when you're looking at a property, commercial property or whatever, freehold or whatever it is in an auction, go to the legal pack and check out the lease. There is always a floor plan. It might be old, but it will show the exterior of the building. There will be a lease plan in the lease itself. And the other thing I always do is to go on the planning website and look up that address and see who's applied for it. Sometimes, like if it's a change of use or whatever, from a A1 to an A2 or whatever, someone would have put in a planning application for that change of use 5-6 years ago, and there would be a plan there. So sometimes I find a workable plan off the lease plan, and sometimes if there's been some planning history on that site, you find it on the local authority planning site. Not always, but it's always worth a check.
Always. Yeah. Well, I think we've kind of burnt through our 30 minutes, which is something that we struggle desperately to keep on top of. But it's always good because hopefully we've shared a lot of value. Piotr, do you want to add anything before we sign off and let Ranjan get on with the rest of his day and the kind people watching the video?
Yes, and today's Monday, so on Monday we'll always release our auction newsletter, our weekly auction newsletter. Today we released one with a deal of the week that I spotted, unfortunately a bit too late. But if you guys want to receive that newsletter and receive it weekly, sign up to this email address, which I just posted, yourpropertyauctions.com, and there is a sign up box in there, so you can put your email and receive our weekly updates. Ranjan, thanks so much for joining us. It's always fascinating to discuss property with you. and yeah, we might do it again in a few days. Depends on how the lockdown goes.
Yes, yes. Meanwhile, time for my morning swim.
Yeah. Lovely. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow. Bye bye.